Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we'll do a little reaction video on Zsolt Bognar's interview with Markus Felsner, Dr. Markus Felsner, manager of classical music. And I've been working with him for many years actually. So this is quite a subjective reaction video, but it covers many different topics of our music market today. And I would love to give you my opinion on many things he says, where I agree, where I disagree. So let's get started.
The old conception of a powerful artist manager being able to make a career is outdated.
This is, of course, very true. I agree. Because in earlier days, artist managers had the network and they could, propose artists to different organizers. Nowadays, the artists also have the capacity to promote themselves through social media and also their phones. So, the managers can assist on the process of making a career, but they are not as powerful as they used to be decades ago.
I'm Zsolt Bognar, host of Living the Classical Life. Today we're speaking with Markus Felsner, who established his own artist agency in Munich. In this conversation, we explore what it means to be a steward of musical lives. We hope you enjoy. Thank you so much for being here and joining us on the show. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me.
One of the reasons why we specifically wanted to have you was initially when I invited you, you said no. And the fascinating reason that you gave was you didn't really want to be the forefront of attention, saying that it's the artist who is important and not the manager.
I have a somewhat untypical background for an artist manager. I spent 25 years in private business, always provided professional services throughout my life, and consider myself a service provider, and find the attitude somewhat strange to think of yourself as an important part in this equation.
Obviously, if you're a manager, you are an important part of the equation. But I agree with him as well that a manager, as the word says already, it manages a career and is not primarily responsible for making decisions. But the way he describes it, I think it's quite well put.
It's about the artist meeting his or her audience. And he may need help and he may need a professionally organized environment to do so. But that is absolutely secondary. And I would personally have difficulties.
Well, I don't think that a professionally organized environment is secondary. I think it's as important as the artistic abilities. But I'm sure he will go more into detail there later.
To look at artist managers, agents as stars in their own right, I find that very strange.
So on the other hand, we have, in the days of artist as romantic hero, we also had romanticized impresarios like Sol Hurok, who figured very prominently into the equation. Any artist in America, for example, aspired to have representation from him. I remember reading the diaries of Van Cliburn, and he said one day he dreamed of himself at the poster Van Cliburn with Sol Hurok. And then Sol Hurok, of course, was bringing over the great Soviet artists. So there was that role. In your view, what was the role back then compared to what it is now, today?
Maybe I should start by saying what I see in today's musical world, where information is available to all presenters about basically every artist in the world. There's a very profound understanding of repertoire. There's a profound understanding of expectations from audiences and what specific artists can offer.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I've just mentioned before. Like every organizer can find a lot of information on the internet, and probably every organizer is already following a few artists that he or she likes. On the other hand, I'm not so sure whether every single organizer really has a very specific opinion about repertoire. From my experience of talking to organizers, they are very open to ideas, and sometimes they don't really know exactly yet what they want to do. But if you bring up very, very specific ideas, then they will love it. Of course, others have their programmatic ideas. And they say, you know, this season is love and death. This season is just Schubert's music. So, I mean, I think it varies greatly from organizer to organizer.
The number of presenters, concert organizers, opera companies, and so on, who need advice, who need technical input from independent professionals who could suggest ideas to them has gone down dramatically. Many of these institutions are led by artists who have their own professional understanding of what they want to present.
I mean, it doesn't matter really if it's artists or business people running those organizations. The question of selling a concert is always like to find out what they actually like, what they need, what their audience likes, what their audience needs, and then to discuss a common solution for that, and to find the artists that suits that environment, and then to make a contract that is win-win for everybody. So I don't think it's really like about advising someone. It's more like finding a common solution of what is the best for everyone.
And I think that has not been the case 70 or 100 years ago, where people like Sol Jurok could interest presenters in artists they had never heard about and vouch for the quality they would get. And Sol Jurok was a legendary figure that I feel not particularly close to, although I used to run the European organization of what used to be Sol Jurok's firm.
Yeah, that was Opus 3 Artists, where I've also been part of in in Berlin's office here, in Berlin actually. And Markus was the CEO of the German part for many years.
I had a very embarrassing discussion when somebody said to a very well-known conductor, Markus is the new Sol Jurok, and I thought, oh my God, this is not going well. And then he said, Markus, if you are the new Sol Jurok, you have to remember his number one rule, which was, I will never understand why artists get 80% of my money. And that's funny, but it is the exact opposite of what I understand to be my profession.
I like his approach of saying he's there for the artists. Of course, every management, every artist, everyone has to make sure that they're profitable as well. In a capitalistic society, we have to make sure that we are making profit. So I kind of get the idea, but of course it has to be working for everyone involved.
I'm not entirely sure what kind of role model someone like Mr. Jurok can still be for us today. What I like about his personality was that he was a very curious man who had very little understanding technically of music. He was not a musician, but he had a very good understanding of what would work in front of an audience, and the sense of what he could invite to America and present to an American audience was absolutely phenomenal. So that being an outsider to the world of music is something that appeals to me in a way, in that sense.
Yeah, I agree with Marcus. You don't really need to be a musician. It's important that you have some passion for what you do, especially in that field. But on the other hand, you need to just understand what everyone wants, and you have to understand human beings. That's more important than understanding music in this role. It's like two different things, right? It's the artistic side and then the management side, which are, like two parts of the medal, so to say.
But otherwise, I think the needs of artists have changed quite dramatically since.
So I'm curious to know a little bit about the background of what you bring to your position in the musical world. So if you started out as a business service provider, where did music come into the equation? And where did this passion come from? If that was there from an early age, why didn't you become a musician, for example?
I come from Berlin. I grew up in the western part of Berlin. I come from a family where we had no books in our home. We had no music. But I was very fortunate to go to an excellent school simply because we lived next door. It was pure coincidence. And in that school we had orchestras, several orchestras. Many of my friends in school were taught by members of the Berlin Philharmonic, the Berlin Radio Symphony Orchestra. And I used to go to their chamber music, house concerts and so on, and was very impressed by that world, and that appealed to me. I started dealing with classical music basically through books. I had a very strange teenage time and read books I was probably not able to understand. When I was 12, 13 years old, I read books by Thomas Mann and Dostoevsky and so on. And every musical reference in these books was something that intrigued me. And that is why also my career, if you will, in learning the repertoire started from a very awkward end with Wagner, then Bruckner, then Mahler and so on. And only later did I discover the works by Mozart and Bach and so on. And I became, if you will, a musical omnivore. We had a public library not far from my home with a big record collection, and every day after school I would go there and take a part of that collection home and sort of learn it, which was difficult in the beginning for me because I didn't understand anything and I found it horrible until I got used to that. And that is how my addiction sort of started.
Addiction has a quite negative connotation, but it sounds very honest and convincing what he says about his upbringing. It's really cool to have people in the industry who are really into music, and I have to say that I really love the questions of Zsolt Bognar in all the interviews. I think that's why he's so successful, because he asks very, very precise questions and is able to highlight the personality in front of him.
Was probably something that had to do with the wish to leave that world that I had grown up in and seeing the beautiful houses of my classical music friends. But it became a real need. We had a wonderful program in Berlin where school children could go to concerts and the opera for the equivalent of €3 a night. And I remember I started to work very early to earn money, and I would spend 4 or 5 nights a week at the opera. And grow up with for €3, watching Domingo and Pavarotti in their great days, and that's what got me started. But then I realized I needed to find a profession that would earn me a living, and I took a 25-year detour, if you will, through law and business. But throughout this time, all my friends were always musicians, basically, singers, orchestra musicians and so on. So my private environment had always stayed that. And I started to organize my own private chamber music series in my home.
So that's how it started.
Yep.
So with that intense love of music, did you ever consider being a musician?
Not beyond the age of 15, I would say. Because of that rather unusual upbringing, I started to play the piano at a very late age and got rather frustrated when, after 6 months of studying, I was still not able to play Tchaikovsky's first piano concerto. And then I came across...
I know what he's talking about because I've tried learning the violin also when I was already studying the piano, and I was also frustrated very quickly. It's once you understand music very well and you know like what is possible, then you expect way too much from yourself and you become impatient. So I understand what he's talking about here.
A book of the famous Austrian writer Thomas Bernhard, Der Untergeher, which basically describes the story of a friend of Glenn Gould, who accepts that he will never be at the level of this genius. And therefore, although a concert pianist, sells his piano to a complete talent-free young girl and never touches the instrument again. And I took that as the justification to never touch a piano again. And I never did.
So it's one thing to have this incredible love of music, but it's a pretty big jump from organizing a private chamber music concert to becoming where you are, managing some of the biggest artists in the world now. How does that happen?
When I made that move from leading one of the larger professional service firms to joining an artist management organization, everybody said this must be a dramatic change and all these crazy artists and how do you deal with that and what a shock. And in reality it was not such a dramatic transformation. I had always advised larger owner-managed businesses. In my home country, there are business organizations worth several $1 billion that are run by one old lady. And so working with such clients can be very challenging in that they are very irrational and they need an environment that helps them to deal with everyday life and realities. And advising an artist and advising an entrepreneur is not that different.
Yeah, he touches a very crucial point here, because being an artist and being an entrepreneur is actually not so different. I mean, there have been many studies concerning the big five personality traits after Carl Jung, and what both have in common is that they're very open to new ideas, right? So an artist is creating artistic results, art, and an entrepreneur also creates something that hasn't been there before. Personality-wise, they're often very close to what he talks about, the irrational part that can be like, from the outside. I mean, Marcus seems to me to be someone who is very conservative, but with a very big conscientiousness. That's also part of the big five traits. So that is a bit different to the entrepreneurial type. Although myself, for example, I'm also very conscientious, but not all artists are, and some might be a bit more neurotic. So there is some tendency in what he's saying. So very funny how he compares those two realms.
So it was not a big change, other than now I enjoy profoundly what I see every day.
A nice.
Yeah, that's true. Like an entrepreneur might create an iPhone or a pen, which you can use every day, or some service. But what the artist does is literally for everyone, and that is the beautiful part about it.
A portion of our viewers consists of young musicians and aspiring performers. They're looking at what their musical paths might be, musical career, if we want to call it that. And the question is, manager at all or self-managing? At what point does this make sense?
That's a very important question that Zsolt touches here, and it's something that literally nobody talks about in the music universities, at least not in Europe. I don't know, maybe it's a bit better in the US, but that's something that I've really missed. My education, I have learned many things, learned about online marketing already during my studies, but not everyone is that curious. So it's a big question.
Does one need a manager in today's world where, if we assume that for most people the earnings are not that large, why put yourself in the position where you give a cut of this tiny amount to someone who is supposedly managing the career, but also there is now a perception that the managers will not really create a career, but join along with something that is already riding on its own momentum?
I think it's very difficult to give a general answer to that. Every case of every artist is different. I think there are very young artists, teenagers, who may need protection from dealing with the wrong people, accepting the wrong invitations.
So what he means is basically probably not the teenagers themselves, but their parents, because the parents are often very pushy and they also want their children to have a flourishing career. And I think it's important not to start with enrolling in a career too early, but to finish school and start after you turn 18.
Playing the wrong repertoire. And management can and must.
Well, the repertoire is mostly the choice of the teachers, right? Teachers and the students together.
Play that role if the private environment cannot. And that's not a question of money.
So I don't really understand what he means there, because I don't think that someone in a teenage years necessarily needs a manager or needs any kind of protection, as he calls it. Someone who's a student should use the opportunities to perform within the school, or if there's something else, then it has to be discussed with the parents. But apart from that, I think there's not much a manager can do at that age.
Question of protecting the talent. Because of the changing knowledge in the musical world, I would still say that the old conception of a powerful artist manager being able to make a career is outdated. Mm-hmm. I don't think anybody in today's world has the power of putting someone on the map of all the big venues, all the big opera companies, by the simple force of his or her name. It's a somewhat naive idea, I think, to assume that any artist manager can pick up the phone and make sure you have your Salzburg Festival debut.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is just there's too much offer right now. I mean, there's so many different artists and opportunities. And as we've discussed before, many organizers have their own ideas already because they follow specific artists. So that is rather difficult, that's right.
It doesn't work that way. And the common desire to be on the list of a respectable artist management organization because you're surrounded by great artists that you admire is understandable, but it is not in itself a guarantee for a successful career.
Yeah, that's a wish that many young artists have, which I think doesn't really make any sense, just to be on a list because to be on a list. So it's important if you work with a manager that you know the manager well, you can trust that person, and there is a good work relationship, and that the manager is doing good work. Everything else doesn't really count, in my opinion. Because also the old days where you have like jump-ins because some other artist in the agency cancels, it's gotten very rare. So there is not necessarily a big benefit to be on a list of a renowned agency. Sometimes it can be even beneficial to be with some smaller agency or just a single person.
I think it's difficult to give a general answer, and every case needs to be looked at. There are artists who can perfectly move on with their artistic dream and have a fulfilling career without ever working with an agent, and that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, that's what I agree with, because it has become much easier nowadays to market and sell yourself as an artist, and that's actually also what I would recommend to everyone who is still studying, to learn these skills, to learn how to market and sell your abilities, because then you also know what you have to look for in someone if you want to work with someone one day. But if you have no idea of these things, then you also don't know whether this person is doing a good job or a bad job. So that's very important that you really learn these skills, and you will have a much easier time later on.
In your estimation, what are the ingredients, if there is one prescription, the essential qualities for a great manager who can really be a steward for musicians and provide for them the best opportunities? Do they have to be based in a certain location? Do they have to have a command of a certain amount of languages? And first and foremost, do they have to have an in-depth knowledge of music like you do?
What helps me in my work is a sense of humility, of humble service to an artist who is either an established genius or promises to have a career that will make him or her a legend at some point in time, and to always think of the artist as your principal in that sense, to be pragmatic and practical in helping the artist to achieve objectives.
Yeah, of course. As I've said before, it has to be a two-way street. So if there is no point in, letting the artist do whatever he wants to do, if that doesn't help you as a manager. So you have to be both ways, to have a good communication, also to be free of outcome. As a manager, not take everyone, because if you're unsatisfied, that doesn't really help anyone. So you should be sure that there is a mutual understanding of where you want to go.
And to have an independent mind that will allow the artist manager to say no to an artist, say no to presenters, and sometimes tell an artist an uncomfortable truth.
Yeah, uncomfortable opinion. There's nothing eventually truth, because the artist might also have own ideas, but I think it's important to share and to discuss ideas.
Because that's a key responsibility. And it's particularly difficult to say no to an artist. It's a common situation that as an artist manager, you agree with an artist of how much he wants to do and how much she or he wants to be protected for his private life, for studying, for learning new repertoire and so on.
In my opinion, this is a little bit of an outdated view, because nowadays there's not so much the question if you can be protected from all the offers and all the interviews and everything. The question is if you can make it. So the question is actually to sell the artist, not so much anymore to just protect him or her, but to really sell and market the artist. And there has to be a common pathway in the direction you want to move, and how you're going to achieve these goals. Right, what kind of where you want to play, with whom you want to play, how often you want to play, and what the fee will be there. That's important parameters, and both have to work on this together. There's no way on just the manager working on this, but there has to be a common ground. Otherwise, it won't work. If the artist just plays, nowadays I think it will be very, very difficult.
But then ultimately, very often, that same artist accepts invitations from friend musician left, right, and center, and then throws the whole thing at you. And then the artist manager is the one who is ultimately blamed for filling a calendar in a way that looks irresponsible.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I said. There has to be a common ground of what the goals are and how they're going to be achieved. Without that discussion, I think it won't work.
So it's difficult to say no, but it's important, I think.
I heard you talking about the ambiguous variables that go into the creation of a legend. And I'm curious to ask about this because if we think about some of the old world legends that have been lionized, I think of musicians like Maria Callas, who, beyond her incredible art, of course, benefited vastly from a booming record industry at the time. She was almost the visible face of advertising a commodity that could be held by consumers. And back then, of course, the point is that the general public was buying recordings, and these became the hallowed names, the recognizable names. In the absence of a record industry now that works or doesn't work in the same way, are there even such legends possible for most artists?
I'm not entirely sure if it's necessary to aspire to something that was possible under the circumstances of our time 70 years ago and simply is not possible in the same way today. Maybe also with the pandemic as a catalyst, we will hopefully come to some sense of humbleness in that we accept that classical music will not have the position in public life that it had 70 or 100 years ago.
Yeah, definitely not in the same way, but classical music is something that everyone loves, right? I mean, we can look at the streaming numbers, for example, for music. We just have to accept change, and the lockdown period was a catalyst for change. And that's where we're moving now, more towards digitalization. There will be different concepts, and probably also it's more like a niche thing. But niche things can also be very beneficial for many people. And many artists will still reach millions of people. And I think it's very beautiful. We just have to accept this change, and that there will be new concepts, new formats, and new ideas which are necessary.
The traditions of education are no longer there. It's not easy anymore to become a superstar.
So for all of the young...
I think it has never been easy to become a superstar, by the way. But there are just different things of what a superstar is. Like back then, as they have discussed, it might be that someone did some recordings with a huge record label, played huge concerts. Nowadays, it might be something else. Also to do some concepts online, right? To be successful there, to be powerful on social media, for example, to influence people in new education formats. Digitalized, for example. Yeah, and that is still possible, I think.
Musicians, the students, the aspiring performers, what advice would you give to these musicians as they make their way? Is it their role, for example, to make music accessible to their audiences and to connect with them on the level of educating them in these cases that there isn't that deeply, no big foundation of classical music education or even of the humanities?
I think it's important that every artist understands that it is her and his responsibility to reach audiences. But obviously there are different ways and different levels of talent to do that. I would still say to every artist, if you have the choice of either practicing or making a beautiful YouTube video, you should practice.
That's a question of age, I think. If you're young and you still are in the phase of really developing your skills, it's important to really practice a lot. But later on, when there's also a manager involved, it's about making a career, and then obviously you need to do those things. So it would be wrong to give different advice, because you need to build a strong brand, a strong profile. And that is something that has to be discussed commonly on how to achieve that, how you position yourself as an artist, meaning who you are, who your target group is, what exactly your repertoire is, and what your ideas are, and for whom it is. And then to market yourself, meaning how to reach the potential organizers, through which channels, online or offline, and how. And then how to sell that. So once people are interested, in how to sell your programs.
To become a better artist. That is number one priority. And
you can be a super artist, but nobody listens to you because you don't have any concerts. That doesn't really help anyone either, right?
sometimes I have to say that to some of the younger artists I work with, who seem to be very distracted by social media and other things. But it is certainly important to use communicative abilities, especially for younger artists, to find a different way of talking about what they do. And
yeah, this is a paradox here, so I don't know really exactly what he means.
Every country has this kind of program where artists take half a day around a performance before or after and go to a school near that place where they play.
That's actually a good thing. It's something that my friend and mentor Lars Vogt has initiated, Rhapsody in School, that artists go into schools, and that has been very successful and very good actually, that artists go to schools and talk to them, and I think that's something that should continue. However, if we look at the children nowadays, like where do they spend most time at? Is it the school? No, it's on their phones. So they spend even more time probably on the phone, even in the breaks, and than they spend in school. So it's important actually to reach the people there where they spend the most time. So why don't do some initiative to reach them on TikTok, on Instagram, on YouTube, because that is the audience of tomorrow. So we have to be in touch with them through this channel.
Or sing and talk about what they do and show it to students in class who have never been to a classical music concert, and expose them. And this has to be done constantly, and hopefully will lead to something.
How do you envision your role in the future?
I would be over the moon if each of the artists I have the privilege to work for will achieve her own objectives artistically. And if the financial and the personal environment works out well, I'm happy too.
Yeah, that's something, like, as I've said, it doesn't make sense to just say the artist has to reach their goals, because it has to be a common ground, and also the financial aspect has to be discussed in advance. Otherwise, there will be problems later on. We cannot just neglect that important part of a career.
But the answer to that question has to be different for each artist. I had this sort of grandiose ambition when I made this move to work with artists who have the potential of changing the way we look at music and becoming legends. And so...
yeah, that's a beautiful vision. I love that.
Hope each of them who has that opportunity will do so, and will ultimately, at the age of 70, be honored with, if that still exists by that time, a career edition from a major label of all the beautiful recordings they made.
Markus, thank you so much for joining us here on the show. It's been a pleasure, and I wish you much continued success with your life, your work, and yes, your role in the lives of all the artists you help. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, yeah, very interesting video. I love that Zsolt Bognar is also inviting a manager here. Now, I've also stumbled across some review on this, which I wanted to share with you too. And that was this article here on Slipdisk. Someone commented on this interview and criticized it a bit because a classical manager comes out of the shadows from Norman Lebrecht, very well known in the scene from January 14th. And he writes, Zsolt Bognar, in Living the Classical Life, conducts a frank and open interview with the shy and retiring Markus Felsner. Retiring, it's quite mean here. Founder of Munich's Felsner Artists. Markus, who had to be eased gently into the public eye, is the agent who fired Valery Gergiev. That's true. He has been working for Valery Gergiev, and Gergiev has been chief conductor of Munich Philharmonic, and because of the war in Ukraine, been asked about the situation because of his close relationship to Putin. He didn't say much, in my opinion, as if I remember correctly, so he has been fired there, and Markus also made the decision to not work with him any longer. And then there's an interview here, and there are some comments here which are quite funny. It's a Felsner, Romy Felsner here from the back. Sorry, but someone has to stop perpetrating falsehood. Oh my god, why? Falsehood. Felsner Artists is not a Munich-based agency, but rather works the vast majority of time for Markus Felsner home, small town of Freiburg. I know that Markus lives in Freiburg. I've visited him there once. Felsner uses a virtual office, really, it's a virtual office address. It's a cover address to give the impression that he runs a Munich-based agency. Okay, that's quite cringe. He may be able to use a common conference room or copy machine, but there is no full-time classical agency operating. Okay, interesting. The virtual Munich address receives posts for the agency and many other owned companies, 134 companies. Okay, so you can buy an address or what. I've heard about these services. If you want to also run the same link next to here's the link. Let me see what is there. I mean, first of all, here I've just looked up the address here. It's in the center of Munich, very prestigious area. Maximilianstraße 2 has one review here, not much. Open around the clock. Okay, but that's just random. Interesting. Let's see what is there. Oh wow, 141 companies. Third eye manager. Trade Europe, interesting. Capital. So many like investment firms, probably not very serious. Many shady things here. Felsner Artists too. Okay, that's actually funny. What is this, like 720 companies with the same name? Galles Immobilien, interesting. Why do they all want to be at the same address? I mean, it's impossible that there are 140 companies in the same building, right? Unless it's like the size of a broom closet, then it's probably not possible. Interesting. Werbeagentur.com. Very, very interesting. Okay, and that's very cringe. Like, why would you use an address where you cannot even have an office? That doesn't make any sense. It looks just very unprofessional, in my opinion. But unless the work is good, I mean, that's the main thing. Let's look at the site. That's nice. It's been founded as a result of the major transformation with classical music. Okay, yeah, I know that he has his office since 2020. And then we have artists. Still quite a good list here. Many artists. Some people I know. I will not say who it is. But so yeah, I guess he's still doing a good job for most of them. So yeah, that was it from a reaction video. Just the whole thing is with the address was a bit cringe. I think there were some other comments here too. And there's other comments too. Amateur in the business. Okay, I mean, I have to be quite transparent here that we have also not worked together anymore because it just didn't work on a professional side, but I still wish that his work is going well. Fascinating interview with insights rapidly. This is good. There is a Bestattungsinstitut. And I mean, doesn't have to be charismatic, right? He's just, he has to be good in business. Agents works for the artists. He lives off the artist's income, yes. That's true. Okay. So we've had many different opinions here about the interview. I think that he said many good things, many very good things. I've also had some ideas where I think he's just not the generation for the digitalization things, and that's it. Yeah. The address thing is a little bit cringe, but if he wants to do that there's nothing wrong about it. As you can still base your company wherever you want to. And I hope to see all of you in the next video. Let me know in the comments what you think about artist managers today, what your opinion is, and let me know if you want to see more of those reaction videos. Looking forward to seeing you again in the next video. Don't forget to like and subscribe the channel. See you there.